My big mouth got me fired twice, and yet I still made VP at Amazon.
This is Ethan Evans. He's the former Amazon vice president who helped build Prime Video and Twitch. He's led 800-person teams, owns more than 70 patents, and has climbed to the top of big tech. But he walked away from it all to pull back the curtain on what it really takes to lead at that level. The CEO that I worked for seduced my wife in direct retaliation for my pushback on him at work. He won.
If you want to get away from snakes, you have to have an escape plan available.
Now, Ethan coaches the next generation of leaders with the real truth about climbing to the top. Tell me about a time you failed in front of Jeff Bezos.
I had 2 catastrophic failures in front of Jeff. I actually disagree with Musk, and I told him that. That seems like a terrible idea.
What do you look for when looking for people that are high potential? You were a VP at Amazon and at Twitch, part of Amazon. What do you look for when looking for people that are high potential, that are at lower levels? Like, how do you catch the eye of a leader?
This is a really fascinating question because as a VP, I found myself having, people always ask for a skip level meeting. They want to meet the VP. I would end up resonating with some people and having ongoing skip levels 3 or 4 levels deep into my organization with, say, an SCE2. And then I would end up not being interested in meeting again with someone who was higher level because it didn't click or resonate. For me, that was usually, was the person discussing interesting ideas? Were they apparently thinking or surprising me with their depth of thinking or cleverness? And were they enthusiastic and collaborative? Because you can have a very smart person who brings you what is a good idea, but with a chip on their shoulder of, I've got this all figured out and you need to do this, Mr. VP. I brought you the answer. Can't you see it? That's off-putting. As opposed to someone who wants to collaborate as like, I have this really interesting idea. Do you think it's cool too? And so it's attitude. And then some people would seek me out, but they didn't really have anything to say. So they would come and say, I'm really excited to meet you. And they just kind of stare at me like, okay, nice to meet you too. What would you like to talk about today? Well, how can I grow here? Some very like ambitious, but empty. And those didn't resonate. So I eventually actually formed a challenge where people would ask me for a skip level or, multi-skip. And I would send them back a note that said, okay, we'll do this, but you have to come prepared to tell me something I don't know. Like there's a burden on you to bring value. Not telling you what it is, but part of the bar for this meeting is teach me something. And some people could and some couldn't. Of course, all of them tried if that was the direction, but some people brought, less and more interesting things.
If you're able to catch the eye of management, then I think that your career growth can really be accelerated. And so for the people that you saw within your organizations where you're like, man, that person's going somewhere, right? And they end up doing that. Like, were there any clustering of traits or personalities or ways that they went about their work that were sort of tells to you that they were high potential?
Lots of people are pretty smart. So beyond that, these are all words for the same thing in a way, but they would be curious. They'd be looking outside of maybe what they were asked to work on. They would be driven by some passion to get deep or to create something. And again, curiosity, creativity, ambition, these are all getting around the same idea of reaching for something more, trying to figure out something new. They would be building something or testing or asking questions. And I contrast this to people who do their job and go home. There's nothing wrong with doing your job and going home, but the people who found a passion in their work to where they wanted to do what others would call work, because they were driven or curious to figure that out is what often was the signal. So they were spending more time often, but it wasn't anyone was making them do it. It's they wanted to. And I think also there is some level of pushing boundaries. You can have classic rule breakers who are rebels, but you can also have people who are just questioning the limits. They might never break a rule, but they will pick and nag and find ways that are within the rules, but still moving forward. So it's not that you have to be a pure rebel, but you have to push on boundaries, because a saying I really like, you may know it, is reasonable men conform to their environment. Therefore, all progress is due to unreasonable men. I think there's truth to that. The definition of unreasonable can vary, but you've got to, when you look at the world, say this can be better, and I'm going to make it that way. And those are the people that I'm like, oh, okay. They're going to find a way to break out and make a real contribution because they're inherently dissatisfied with the status quo, as opposed to, oh, this is how it is. Okay. That this is how it is. Okay. Is rarely leads to breakthrough performance.
There's probably a set of people that want to catch the eye of management. They wanted to impress you during the skip level, but they don't know what to do, right? They're like, oh, I would love to have some time with Ethan. And then they didn't bring you anything. And then that's the thing that forced you to have the, hey, you have to teach me something. But like, what if you're in that situation? You have the ambition, you want to do well, but you kind of like don't know what to do with your hands.
Sure.
Okay?
I have two pieces of advice there. First, random beats nothing. Analysis paralysis, right? Getting stuck and I won't try anything is worse than, well, I'll pick something. Even if it's dumb, I'll learn, is one option. But the other, there is this argument. Should you become an expert in what's in front of you, whether you like it or not, or should you follow your passion? And I noticed, for example, here you have a bookshelf that has Cal Newport's writing. And I think Cal is amazing. He's an advocate, at least in part, for just get really amazing at whatever your challenge is and you'll learn to like it, is more his philosophy. I am definitely more of the other philosophy, which is find something that comes natural and easy to you and then push to become the best at that, because it will be, at least for me, pushing through pain to get good at something I can do, but running down a track I already love is effortless. And so for this person, I would say, figure out what excites you. Ask, what am I doing on the weekend already with my spare time? And then how do I make that relevant to work? Or how do I find some way, again, to overlap those circles in the Venn diagram? How could this possibly overlap? That's where I find the breakout comes from. And for me, to make that real, once I discovered the idea of managing people and managing projects, it was like crack. I had to try and do more of it and better and learn the skills and learn the influence and learn the process, all of the pieces that would allow me to organize bigger and bigger projects. And so I became very good at it and had a lot of success down that path, but driven by the fact that it was exciting to me.
Are long hours the only way to get ahead?
This episode is brought to you by Linear. Let's be honest, the issue tracker that you're using today isn't very good. The only thing worse than fixing the issue itself is fighting with the software that tracks it. Linear is different. It's incredibly fast, well-designed, and purpose-built for modern software development. Engineers like me love the keyboard shortcuts. It gives me Vim-like vibes, direct integrations with modern and ubiquitous tools like GitHub, and built-in project updates that keep everyone in sync. That way, you don't update your issue and then immediately go to Slack to ping the right people. That's just using Slack for issue tracking, but with more steps. Linear is the default choice for engineers at some of the most well-known and fastest-moving companies in the world, like OpenAI, Vercel, and Perplexity. Modern projects deserve modern issue tracking that works seamlessly for companies small, big, and gigantic. I personally love Linear because I resonate with their values. You have to trust issue tracking software from people that have a zero-bug policy on the software that they sell to other people. Seriously, no bugs. Whether you're using it at work already or perhaps wanting to test it out on that side gig, head to linear.app/ALE to learn more. I'll also drop the link in the description. Thanks again to Linear for sponsoring today's conversation.
I hesitate to say anything is the only way, but long hours make a huge difference because, well, it's just math. If one person's working 40 hours and the other is working 60 and they are both working those times, the person working 40 is going to have to be whatever, 50% more efficient or incredible. And that's a high bar, because if you're playing at a high level, all the other people are good too. And so sure, if I take you as a former Amazon principal engineer and drop you in amidst people with 20 years less experience, you're going to be able to outperform them at a 50% rate, hopefully. But amongst your peer set, that's not a realistic expectation because they're all good also. So hours matter. I do think if there's a hack on hours, I'm a huge fan of something Cal Newport talks about, since he's a touch point for you, flow state, getting in the zone, because if you're in flow state or highly focused work, your productivity ramps up non-linearly because of the way our brains appear to work. You shut down external stimuli, you lose a track of time, and you're hyper productive. If you can learn to get into that hyper productive focus more, that's a way to get more in less hours. I actually think the magic of it, though, is it's not that you're getting more and less hours, it's that you're no longer feeling the hours. So to make this really concrete, I retired from Amazon, and I've been transparent in my writing that I made enough money at Amazon that I don't need to work. I choose to work. For me, it's that flow state. It's the sense of accomplishing something. I work because the work gives me more pleasure. My wife has asked me, when are you going to retire again? What do you have a thought? And I've told her, well, if I quit working for money, if I quit making any money from what I do, I'd still want to do this work. And if I stop doing this work, I'm going to be less happy than if I'm doing it. So why would one retire? Why would one stop doing something? You're going to be less happy. And then if people want to give me money to do that thing, well, of course I'm going to graciously accept. So that's my current situation. But I think it is possible to get there to where you're doing something you love that people will happily give you money for.
Let's go back to management.
Sure.
So I think there's a risk when you're trying to impress people / trying to do something that's bigger than you. Maybe you're pushing a boundary, as you would call it, where of course there's going to be a risk of screwing up. How do you think about managing that risk between trying to do something that's big or bigger than you and making a big mistake in front of the person that could actually help further your career or actually get your career stuck?
If you don't take any risk, you will be eclipsed by people who do, as follows. Some people will choose to take risk, and whether some of them will then fail and fall on their faces, and they may be judged or thought no good. But some of them, whether through skill or luck, that risk will work. And whether it is skill or luck, they will raise the flag and claim it was skill. And if you've taken the safe course, that person who got lucky or was good and just took the risk will look better and they will move up faster. So I think we have to take risk. And understanding that if you want to be a high performer, it comes with some gambling or risk taking is an important thing to ingest, that the safe path all the time usually won't get you there. The second thing I think about then with risk taking and with standing out in front of leadership is if something goes wrong, how you handle it can build trust. We actually, if you think about trust and what causes people to trust you, we trust people more when they've done what we need them to do when the chips are down. We have lots of sayings for this. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. We have all sorts of sayings around adversity. But there is some reality that if you take a risk and it goes wrong, now there is the truth that you're in an adverse situation and your leader's attention is focused on you. And how you handle that adversity can actually lead to them having more trust. And so that environment, risk can actually be, in a sense, win-win. You take the risk, maybe you're successful. If you're not successful, you can learn and you can show that you're good at handling adversity. Now, that's not the best outcome, but it can actually work out. The last thing, since I've spent a ton of time thinking about this, our nervous system is built to keep us alive. Our circuitry that gets triggered when we think about a risk and about failing or falling down is built to avoid falling off cliffs and being eaten by tigers. But in the modern business world, there aren't really cliffs and tigers in the same way. And so how we feel holds us back more than the real downside. We imagine or feel, oh God, this is death. My career will be over, whatever. I'm sure you know, my big mouth got me fired twice early in my career. And yet I still made VP at Amazon. I had other setbacks we can talk about within Amazon. Those were catastrophic risks being realized, but they didn't stop me. And if I knew now, I'd probably be a lot bolder. I might walk off a cliff that really would stop me, and that would be bad, but I would probably be a lot bolder if I had my career to do over again.
So what I'm hearing is it's this bounce back, that it's like provides another opportunity to sort of salvage something if the original thing that you took a risk on didn't pay off.
That is correct. That is exactly right. But it depends on your ability psychologically to power through. And to explain that, some people, when the risk happens, when the problem happens, so the risk is realized and the bad thing happened, they turtle up. They go into damage control mode. They start apologizing. They start avoiding their boss. They can't look their boss in the eye because they know the boss is mad or frustrated or having to cover for them. They shrink. And the problem with this is if something has gone wrong and you suddenly look low confidence, guilty, etc., it's natural for me to assume, oh, this went wrong because you didn't know what you were doing. Whereas if you step into it and say, okay, that didn't work out. Here's my new plan. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. I'll report back on this date. It's a matter of, do you step back or step forward? Do you turtle up or do you so-called rise to the occasion? And I think what you're calling bounce back, I would call rising to the occasion. And that I've realized in hindsight, I did that naturally. Who knows, as a factor of my upbringing or something, when something went wrong, I looked at it and said, great, we'll fix it. And then I learned how to say that better and be good at it. But some other people get paralyzed and you can't do that. That will make you'll be judged at that point. You solidify the loss as opposed to having a chance to pivot it.
Tell me about a time you failed in front of Jeff Bezos.
So interestingly, I will tell you one of the stories. I had two catastrophic failures in front of Jeff. Different, but I had two of them, both. Definitely he knew I'd screwed up and definitely he knew it was me and I had to face him. The one I talk about the most is after you and I worked together, I was launching the Amazon App Store. And we had a feature that Jeff really loved. Jeff thought it was the best feature of the launch, and he wanted to write what we called a Jeff letter, introducing that feature to customers where he would take down the main page of Amazon and put up a letter about this feature. Well, I and my team started launching the feature the night before. We had a lot of press lined up around it. We had wordsmithed this letter. To simplify, we worked all night to get everything pushed out, all the services up. We were testing. Morning came, 6 a.m. or so. Everything was working except the feature he cared about. And so we hadn't put the letter up because we didn't want to direct people to this feature that didn't work. Well, Jeff wakes up and he sends me a note sends all of our team a note, but I'm the one who's up and I'm the owner. He sends a note that says, hey, where's the letter? So I sent him back a note very quickly that said, oh, we're working on some problems, which is a terrible answer for Jeff. No detail. But I was trying to buy time, hoping, like, I'm thinking to myself, get in the shower, or maybe you do a morning workout, get on the treadmill. Because like all engineers, talking with my team, we feel like it's got to just be a configuration or something with 20 minutes, we're going to find it and it's all going to be fine. Turns out that was not at all true, but hope springs eternal. Well, unfortunately, within like 30 seconds, I get an email back that says, what problems? And the famous Amazon dive deep auditing begins. And as more leaders wake up, more people in my management chain pile on the thread. I was a director at the time. The SVP, who was Jeff Wilkie, and my VP are all on this thread asking questions, and it's spiraling out of control. This is where I dropped into that damage control we talked about. And I think there's a specific process for that. I had lost trust. And so I started by sending Jeff an email, let's say at 9 a.m. I don't know the exact time. But I said, look, it's obviously not working. We're not going to be able to put the letter up right now. Here's what we're doing. Here's our plan for the next hour. Here's the actions we're going to take. I will update you by 10 a.m. or sooner if something changes. And by sending an email like that, I was telling him I had a plan, but I was also changing his decision. One decision he and the leaders above me could have had was, oh, Ethan screwed up, get someone in there, get a better Sev1 leader, essentially, get a more experienced person. I changed it from, can Ethan fix this problem, to, does this next hour sound reasonable? Is there anything we do differently? Or does that plan sound solid? Since my plan sounded solid, they left me alone for an hour. And then I did those things. I reported back, told them the next plan, told them the next plan. And so I was buying credibility an hour at a time. The next piece, though, I've talked about not turtling up. I was on another project as an advisor, and that team met with Jeff twice a week in his conference room. So I had a chance, like the following Tuesday, I think we launched on a Friday. The following Tuesday or so, I had a chance to go meet with Jeff in his office with like 6 other people. And my initial thought was to turtle up, like, oh my God, he's mad at me, don't go there. But then I thought about that for a couple of minutes, and I realized if I can't face the CEO, I better pack my desk. And so what I did instead was I went to that conference room early. Jeff always sits in the same chair. So I sat down right next to where he'd be and thought, let's find out how this is going to go. So he comes in, we hold the meeting. I'm sweating bullets because he's not really paying attention to me. But then in hindsight, I realized I was an advisor, not the team. So he was talking to the team. We get to the end of the meeting and he turns to me and speaks. Now, a leader like that has at least 3 things they can say. The first thing he could have said was, what the hell are you doing here? Shouldn't you be cleaning up your disaster? Critical. He had every right to say that, and many leaders would have chosen that. The second thing he could have said would have been more tactical. Oh, I see you're here. What's the status update? Where are we? That's what many managers would have done. He turned to me, having been mad at me and flamed me several times in email over the weekend for incompetence and misusing a database, and said, so how are you doing? It must have been a long week. He chose the human path to build relationship. And so I knew it was going to be okay, and I stayed at the company. He could have fired me without firing me by the other choices. The key, I would say, though, to recovering this situation is it's also true Jeff knew in that moment I was not afraid of him. I was willing to show up, stand up, and engage him. And I think that's part of his decision is here's a leader who I've been flogging, but he's not going to run away or hide. And so I think that was a big difference. And ultimately, I was promoted to vice president after that. Jeff personally approved all VP promotions. So somewhere in there, even though I totally botched his launch, the letter never went up because by the time we got things fixed, the moment had passed. The letter never went public. He still ultimately promoted me because I had shown that I could handle a crisis and that I could also handle him, right? Big leaders have the problem that a lot of people become sycophants, right? The yes men, yes women. It's pretty clear I wasn't going to do that.
Yeah, I think this turtling up after a mistake is such a fatal thing to do. Like, what if you had just kind of shrunk away and let somebody else replace you because you couldn't take
I'd have been gone.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, I love this idea of taking the adversity and then the mistake and then sort of sticking your chest out and rise to the occasion.
And that's hard. I shared with you, my first thought was turtle up. Like, oh God, I'm not going to that meeting. And luckily I had a little bit of time to think, well, what's the implication of that? And realize that I didn't want to do that, but it still took a lot to then go sit in the room and see what happened.
So I was going to go to the controversial tweet.
Sure.
Okay. So I'm just going to read it off. A CEO that I worked for seduced my wife in direct retaliation for my pushback on him at work. He won. When I say I truly understand how some executive teams can be political snake pits, I trust you will believe me. I have to ask, looking back, what were the early red flags that this CEO was capable of this? How can somebody sort of notice when there are snakes around and start to think about whether they want to be there or not?
Yeah, well, I can't claim that there weren't plenty of warning signs. The way the company had run up to that point was very unstable. Other leaders had quit to get away from it. At that point in my career, prior to Amazon, there had been an economic recession driven by 9/11, the 9/11 attacks and some other stuff. And that's when I told you I had lost 2 jobs by having a big mouth. So I really needed this job. And so part of it was I was ignoring or tolerating the warning signs because I needed the job or thought I did. The second thing I would say is seeing that a manager is unethical or eccentric, strange at work and dishonest still never triggered in me the thought that it would become personal. I had this wall in my life of work and home being separate. So I didn't see the rest of that situation. I didn't see where that was going to go coming. I think the signs were essentially this was a person who I'll politely say told stories. And why I say told stories is he may have believed his own propaganda. He may have legitimately been speaking what he thought might happen. But to the rest of us, they sounded like somewhere between fantasy and dishonesty. That was my warning sign. It was there. I just didn't realize the stakes I was playing for and thought I needed the job. At that point in my life, I hadn't done a good job, say, having the cushion economically to go be unemployed and look. If you want to get away from snakes, you have to have an escape plan available. I would advise everyone, for sure, you will find yourself someday with a bad boss. If you don't have a good network or some money in your savings, you're going to be in a much worse situation than if you can afford to say, you know what, this isn't the place for me.
I think that marriage ended in divorce, and sort of coupled with our discussion about, our long hours, the only way to get ahead. And I think we've talked about the fact that you had told me that VPs disproportionately have a large amount of divorces and routinely sacrifice their relationships to get ahead. I guess my question is is it worth it?
So I want to be clear. I know plenty of executives who have happy marriages or what appear, we never know anybody else's life, but have remained married, and seem to be very happy. So it's not everyone has a trail of disasters. At the same time, I will share directly, I knew a guy in Amazon. He was a director at the time. He had been divorced and he went to a support group. And he came back very depressed because several of the other executives there in the support group had laughed at him and said, oh, this is only your first one. Because they were coming for support after multiple divorces. So definitely some people wreck their lives. Since we just discussed that tweet, I do feel like I had help wrecking my life, right? There was an external factor, and that might have turned out differently without the third person involved. Maybe it wouldn't have. The key is, though, long hours are attractive, money is seductive, hard work. I don't think you have to wreck your life, but you can only do so many things at once. Most of the people I see who truly prioritize family, who really prioritize being there at everything for their kids and being at home, take a step back in their career to do that. The number of people I see who somehow are incredibly successful in their work and also completely there for their family or the rest of their life, they exist, but it's like the Cal Newport. It's these overperforming people that I don't know how to be. You can optimize, you can make choices in different seasons, but I think for most of us, there is a trade-off. Now, that doesn't have to go down necessarily as far as divorce, but there is a trade-off of how many ball games or school plays versus being a top performer at a peak company.
There's a reason that steroids are banned in professional sports and Olympic sports. And the reason isn't that we don't want to see humans break records or perform at their absolute highest, but because there is a physical toll associated with these performance-enhancing drugs. And so it feels to me like there's this choice that you might have to make, which is, do you want to be successful and therefore sacrifice things like family and relationships and your personal time, or do you want to get ahead? And so it just feels like, man, it's like that person decided to sacrifice his life, and therefore the system and the game is sort of rigged against me.
Yeah, well, one of the problems we talked about earlier, how when you're competing with others, if you don't take risks, some others will take risk. Well, the same competition is true somewhat around performance. In a group of people, there'll be a distribution of how much each of them wants to work. And some of them are going to want to work really hard. It might be that if you're extremely talented, again, you can keep up with some of those hard workers and still work less. But all other things being equal, if you and the competition are roughly on an even field, the fact that somebody is willing to sacrifice then puts a choice on you to either do the same or accept second place. And I think that is generally a realistic choice you have to look at and say, yes, I'm going to do what I can to be clever and I'm going to do what I can to break the laws of physics. But I think for most people, there are laws of physics, only so many hours in the day. We talked about family and work. The other pivot I see people sacrifice is health. They're there for their family. And they're there at work, which means they don't eat right, they don't sleep right, they don't get any exercise, they never take vacation. And that has a different toll. Comes out also maybe later, right? That would be like the book, The Body Keeps the Score, things like that. But I don't have magic here. I do think it's more a question of asking what's super important. And I think I'm well known, just like my tweet was very transparent, for being super honest. I don't give myself like a high A grade as a parent. I think I was an adequate parent. I provided, I was present, but was I like one of the superstar parents everybody dreams of? I don't think so. And that's a choice I made.
You gave yourself a C.
Yeah.
As a parent.
Yeah. And I stand by that. And I'm not proud of that, right? I wouldn't tell people strive for a C or accept a C. It's frankly, my talents ran towards work. We talked about the gifts in the Venn diagram. I am not a gifted parent. I'm a fine parent, an adequate parent. And, statistically, I guess that's where, the middle distribution is adequate parents. But that's all I was.
A C is like an Asian F, right? So, yes. No,
So true.
What I'm hearing you say is just like, you didn't make the rules. Like, here are the things that you get to choose from, but you just can't have them all. I think the winning move is just decide what you want. And then do that knowing that there's upsides and downsides, but there's no secret to having everything.
No, I agree with that. And I would say make intentional choices, as you've just said. The only caveat I would try to give is try to have a very long-term lens on that. And that's difficult. By long-term lens, I mean, my career was right in front of me and I was doing well in it and getting rewarded. And so I invested in that. You realize that you didn't parent as well as you might have later. You don't see it as much on any given day where you stay late at work and miss dinner with your family. It feels like a one-time trade-off. But then you realize you've done that 2,000 times over 20 years and it's added up. It's a little bit, I think, although this is a more obvious trade-off, like smoking. Smoking a cigarette today won't kill either one of us, but the pattern might. And so make those choices, but try to talk to someone older or have some of the long lens of what am I trading off that I may not see right now that may come back to haunt me.
Maybe you answered it, but like, what if you could go back in time and talk to 25-year-old Ethan? What would you say?
I think the thing I would tell, and I do tell young professionals when I speak to them today, is I tell them, try to have some comfort it's all going to work out, that you are going to get where you're going, because most of the people, for example, who are going to listen to what you have to say here, they're driven, they're smart, they speak, read, and write English, even if it's not their first language. They're fluent, they're online, they're usually highly educated. They have the deck stacked so far in their advantage that given enough time, those advantages are going to pay off. The biggest question I would ask earlier me is, if you relaxed a little bit and worked a little bit less hard, would you be way happier with your life as a whole? Because yes, you got to VP, I don't know, 2 years later, but like the 20 years in the middle were way more pleasant because you weren't worried. I spent a lot of time being stressed about, was I going to succeed? And that's probably, I would try to coach my younger self not to worry about it so much, to believe, have faith.
Yeah, I do think that a lot of us, our drive to succeed, it forces us to sort of like clench, even when, that's just not going to do anything. It's not a time to fly away or to fight. So it's like really hard to turn off. There's a debate that we had on LinkedIn, and you shared with me that you've never written a line of production code. And I had written a post about how I had preferred managers who had been former software engineers and had sort of worked in the same trenches that I found myself in. You had talked about the two different groups, right? So there's a group of managers who haven't written code before, and then there's a group of managers who have written code before. And so I had stated a preference that I think I like the ones that had checked code in and it's sort of been there. Do you disagree with that statement or that preference, or like where's the disagreement there?
Possibly there's no disagreement, but you're only looking at one variable. So an interesting question to ask is, if we were able to measure those two groups of managers on a number of variables, engineers often, I think this was more or less your viewpoint, prefer the ones who've walked a mile in their shoes and done some coding because they feel they'll have more empathy, more understanding, more ability to advise, a bunch of positive traits. The question is, because we said there's no free lunch, what have they traded off to get that? Are they as good interpersonally? Are they as good at developing careers? Are they as good at getting resources, at influencing executives, etc.? Now, the magic manager is technically fluent, did their time building code, and somehow is also highly skilled as a leader and a personnel manager. But is there a difference between those two groups? Well, what I can tell you is, in my case, I made a choice to lean into that other set of skills. And I ended up having a ton of success without having done a bunch of code development. How many people are like me? How many people are like this ideal that can do everything? How many fit the stereotype of there is another stereotype, right? If the one stereotype is the clueless boss that doesn't understand the technology, the other stereotype is the technical manager who is politically inept and can't communicate with anybody else. Where's the middle ground?
Well, let's just take your life.
Mhm.
And so you said that, hey, your first job out of school, you sort of realized that you had the superpower and it didn't involve code. But what if you had spent 2 months squashing a bug, getting one line of code out in production? Do you think that that would displace any of the skills that you currently have? I don't think it would. I don't see it as a zero-sum sort of thing.
Yeah. The question is, how much would it have added? If I'd have squished one bug, as you say, done one check-in or 10 or 100, where is the dividing line where that makes me have the right level of empathy for software development, particularly given, for my master's thesis project, I wrote 10,000 lines of code to control a robotic arm. So it isn't like I hadn't written large volumes of code. I just have been transparent that once I was paid as a software developer, I didn't. Where's the line? 11,000 lines of code or 1,000 as a professional? I don't know. I told you when we talked about how quickly I went, let's call it non-technical, I went over to management. It was a very unusual path. I actually don't think my path was the best. What happened, and this is where sort of our online debate lost the nuance, is I ran down that path and then I was 5 years in and I wasn't going to go back and act as an SDE1 when I was already a manager. I do know a few people who've done that. They've stepped away and then stepped back. I wasn't going to do that. I had my eyes set on bigger teams and bigger impact. And that had the cost that I had left behind something. Then in hindsight, it would have been good to have. And I simply managed around it. And the point of the discussion with you is, of course, you worked for me. No one at Amazon ever knew. I was able to just quietly keep that on the side. Now, you may have suspected or felt, you told me at one point you felt you came for me for technical advice and I was somewhat useless to you. You were maybe 2% kinder than that, but that's essentially what you said. But I managed to deliver huge things for Amazon and lead very large engineering teams. If I could do it all over again, I probably would do it differently. But that's kind of the way things unfolded.
You had told me that you had interviewed with Elon Musk.
Yes.
He had stated that even VPs within SpaceX or wherever it was were expected to code 10% of the time. And you ended up declining it or not going forward with it. But was part of you sort of allergic to the fact that you would have to go back and learn how to code?
No, not at all. Because that was never a question of something I would do. And what I mean by that is I actually disagree with Musk. And I told him that. I said, it seems insane to me to have a VP dabble in code on a rocket that's going to carry people. That seems like a terrible idea.
Elon, that's a stupid idea.
Well, that is what I told him. I didn't use the word stupid, but I did express it how I did to you. And, his name's on the building, not mine. He said, this is a place where we'll have to agree to disagree. Although even he said, well, maybe you could write like diagnostic code or work on tools. Like he did have some awareness that my point of a VP, spending 3 or 4 hours a week in the rocket code might not work out. But at that point, what made that discussion so strange to me is I had told the recruiters up front, hey, what kind of VP are you looking for? Because I've made a choice that my focus is on building and leading teams. I'm not the sort who codes. And the recruiters said, oh yeah, we don't want that. So then I got in Elon's office and he did. And I was reacting to this like, wow, I tried to prevent this exact conversation. So how that meeting ended was I explained to him what I'd done and what his recruiters had told me. And he was like, oh, that's completely wrong. And as I was leaving his office, he was having his assistant call his recruiting team in And they were not happy with me. Like I went home, but like the sort of closing the interview note I got was very curt. We're sorry we wasted all of our time in having you come. It ran something like that.
Well, this is the part of the interview where I usually ask like what's left for you and what you want to accomplish. But I get the sense that you're kind of doing what you want to do.
I still care a lot about impact and scale. So I have a wonderful life where I advise people on their careers. I help them overcome hurdles, particularly in leadership and how to grow as leaders, how to be bigger executives or to become executives. And I get personal thank you notes. I'm not soliciting them, but people write me on LinkedIn or on my website or wherever. I get several thank you notes a day for the impact I've had on people's careers. It's amazing. What I think about is, on the other hand, I'm reaching like 1/100th of 1% of the professionals in the world. I'm getting the feedback that shows what I do is really valuable. So I think a lot, if I want to have a bigger impact or achieve something, it's how do I scale that? How do I make it available to more people? And so the biggest fun tool that's doing that for me is I've created a chatbot version myself. And people tell me it really helps them. They're using it daily to handle their management conversations or their delicate communication. And that's something I can put out to the whole world. It's available 24/7. And so my next attempt at sort of global scale is that, because it can be everywhere I can't.
We'll put a link to that in the show notes in the description. But what's a trend that's going on right now that you wish people would just stop talking about?
I think, wow, that's a good question. I love that. A trend right now I wish people would stop talking about. Not everything needs to be a TikTok or a reel. Like short form video is awesome for some things, but there's a lot of evidence, of course, it's actually rotting our brains. If you look at attention span and other, so it's actually bad, and just not everything needs to be, how do I grab your attention in 8 seconds? So short form video.
Short form video. What's something that's undervalued that you can't believe that people aren't talking about more?
Okay, something that's undervalued. I can't believe people aren't talking about more. These are, you're definitely catching me, making me think. Okay, the power of networks, the power of building a personal network, relationship. I came from an engineering world. Most people are introverted. I'm in the middle. I'm not a true extrovert, but I'm more extroverted than some. It took me a long time to realize that old saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know, is super true. And it antagonizes a lot of technical people because we're so into what we know. But if you know all the right people, they can open doors that maybe don't deserve to be open, and they will open them for the person they like and trust more than the person who's smartest or quote unquote right, because they don't know that person. They don't feel a connection. And so undervalued is building the relationships that will open doors.
Yeah, I think if people put as much effort into growing and strengthening their network as they did for other things, you'd find that it was a much higher leverage activity.
Right.
And a lot of stuff that's out there. Ethan, thanks so much for coming to the studio and having this conversation. I'll make a link to EthanGPT. I think that's what you called it. But is there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
You know, my mission is to help other people with their careers. And the central hub for that is my website, which is just my name, EthanEvans.com. If people are interested in high performance career growth, particularly as leaders, my classes, my newsletter, all the things I do, my GPT are all linked off that website. So that would be the thing I'd want people to see.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.